Hey everybody, welcome to Recombinant Teaching. On this episode of the STEM course design series, we're going to apply everything we've learned about and talked about so far in this series when it comes to pre-class, in-class, after-class, learning objectives, assessments, and talk about some special course design scenarios, namely labs and online teaching. So no matter what STEM discipline you're in, you probably have some kind of lab associated with it, chemistry, biology, physics, geology, engineering for sure. And those are a little special, right? They take a little bit different training, a little bit line of thought, a little bit way of thinking. It's a little bit different for how to implement those effectively compared to a normal Monday, Wednesday, Friday lecture-based course. Online courses too. A lot of us, especially during the pandemic, had to teach online. I was teaching online for years before that, and I still do it today. So I have a lot of experience teaching online. And when you apply these principles of high-structure course design to an online situation, it's easy to adapt them too. It might be a little bit creative, but I'll argue today that it's really, really critical to use these high structure principles in online settings, especially online asynchronous, where you're losing out on an instructor presence. All right, so we'll get to all that and more today. But first, let's start with labs. So again, no matter what STEM discipline you're in, you're going to have a lab associated with it, whether it's an introductory lab that's teaching lots and lots of students as a service course, or maybe an upper division specialized elective type lab. And we all know how labs are and what they're so great at, which is giving that hands-on experiential development, right? Students are in the lab, they're doing the actual types of measurements, they're looking at data, they're analyzing it, they're working in teams, they're collaborating, they're learning through failure. All this is so important to developing as a scientist, no matter what field you go on to in science or engineering or medicine or anything else. And so how do you support and design lab courses to give students success? Well, again, these principles of high structure directly apply. Well, we might not say pre-lab, in lab, after lab, and think about, well, okay, what do we do traditionally here? When I was in college, how did these things work? You might have had pre-lab notebooks. You might have had canned experiments in the lab, cookie cutter lab, sometimes we call them. And those things are fine, right? They give students the opportunity. They help them work through, again, learning some basic skills in the lab. And especially for introductory levels, you might want to do more of that. But again, these high structure principles of getting students engaged ahead of time, during time, and after time can easily apply here to the lab setting too. So what about pre-lab, right? And so what do you do before lab? Well, you could have students preview the protocols. You could have them maybe look at some data that they might be collecting and what it's going to be looking like. They might be familiar with the equipment and the experimental methods of what they'll be doing, and you can have them read all this. You can also have them watch. So like we talked about in the pre-class episode, you could do pre-class reading or watching. Same thing with the lab. There could be the pre-lab reading of these protocols and experimental design methods. You can also do pre-lab videos. You can make your own videos showing, hey, here's what you're going to get today. Here's what these different tubes are. Here's where the equipment is and how it works. And have students watch that ahead of time, take a little pre-lab quiz about it. And that's only going to help them out when they get to the actual lab. In my book, I have a lot of references summarized there about the efficacious nature of pre-lab assignments, especially pre-lab watching and pre-lab reading. It does wonders for students in terms of performance, but one of the biggest things it does is help with time management. All of us that teach labs, and I've taught labs for, pushing 15 years now, time management is critical. When students are not prepared for lab, they come in, they don't know what's what, they get flustered, you as the instructor gets flustered, they get behind, they're rushing, might not even finish. Also, that can lead to dangerous situations too, depending on the type of lab you're teaching. If you're an organic chemistry lab, for example, that is legitimately very dangerous work you're doing. And you need to be careful that students understand the risks of that, and therefore they understand what they're doing in the lab. Another downside with lack of preparation for lab courses is students don't understand really why they're doing things. I've had many times over the years where I've asked a student, hey, why are you adding that reagent to this tube? Or why are you doing this step in the process? So like, I have no idea. It's just what the paper says to do. They have a hard time sometimes connecting in my case, the biology to the actual lab work. But if you give students a chance to learn ahead of time, do some pre-class assessment, pre-lab assessment, just like we do for pre-class, have an online quiz, something like that. You could have those pre-lab notebook questions you bring in, handwritten, whatever you want to do. You're going to hopefully help students connect the conceptual understanding, the physical sciences, the biological sciences, the underlying engineering phenomena behind the lab work. So then they're doing the lab, they're going to be able to understand more of what's happening. So pre-lab prep, super helpful here because, again, that will help students get the foundations of the concepts, and then they can apply it and be better at time management and be better at safety and have a better overall lab experience. So that's some of the big reasons why I do pre-lab. Are you going to do active learning in a lab situation? 100%, right? All you do is active learning because you're doing lab work. You're most likely working in teams. Labs are typically done in groups. You're working with the actual reagents and equipment again. You're collecting data. You're asking questions. You're hypothesizing. You're doing all real lab work. So it's just active learning is baked in. That part's easy. You're going to get that in lab experience covered pretty quickly. One of the best things about lab work too is you learn from failure. Labs don't always work. Oftentimes they don't work, probably the majority of the time. And when that happens, students have to deal with failure in the lab setting. They have to understand, well, why didn't this work? How can I fix it for next time? What can I do better the next time I do it? How can I make it work the next time? And they're not just grappling with the technical aspect of it, it's also the emotional. Lab work can be very emotional. It can go up and down all the time. Science goes awry all the time. And how do you handle that? Especially if it's a multi-week lab, you've been working with something on a project for the entire course, and then it just doesn't work at the end, right? How are you were expecting this result and you just didn't get anything, right? Just blank. And that can be really, really frustrating. So I tell students a story from grad school. For me, when I was at UC Davis, I did trying to do this site-directed mutagenesis PCR reaction, so molecular biology technique. I was trying to do it every day, basically for a month. Every day. I might even came out on weekends. I don't remember. Never worked. Could not work. Tried to tweak every single parameter possible. Could not get it to work. Literally a month. And then we hired an undergraduate student named Camelia. She came in, her second try because she got it to work. I don't know. Molecular biology sometimes is magic, we say. And in this case, it was. But so I was dealing with immense frustration of failure in the lab there. And it ended up being a really good teaching experience for Camelia because I was able to tell her, like, hey, I can't get this to work. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. You go ahead and try, right? And so she felt great when she got it to work. I was very humbled and was able to communicate that with her, the frustration I was having, and then the happiness I had for her to get it to work too. And that happens in the classroom too. It happens in the academic lab, whether it's intro bio or gen chem or anything else. Students will feel that frustration and humility when things don't work, but then they also feel that success and joy and jubilance when it does work. So it's nice to see both sides. After class or after lab, you're going to have assignments there too, right? Typically we do lab reports. It's a very standard bread and butter thing for intro bio, gen chem, intro physics, things like that, those labs. But you also might want to vary it up. You might want to do poster presentations. You might want to do oral presentations. You might want to do one-page technical memos or flyers, right? You want to think about the other kinds of media, the other kinds of deliverables we might do in science. Nowadays, right, we might do social media posts on LinkedIn about our work. We might do mini podcast episodes, right? You can be really creative with what you do after lab. So think about that. Move beyond the traditional lab report. Try to do something else. But then also think about frequency of assessment here too. So you might have a lab report due at the end of the module or the end of the course even. Try to give some feedback along the way. Have students submit drafts, do peer review feedback. You can give them feedback. You can do it a lot of different ways, but try to get some feedback built into those assessments. Don't just wait for the end product to be turned in and then you grade it as usual. Okay, one last note on labs here. I want to thank you to encourage thinking beyond the cookie cutter approach or the canned labs I mentioned earlier. Again, basic labs, we've been doing these for decades in biology, thinking about, just standard restriction enzyme digest, PCR, thinking about bacterial methods, plating. Okay, so again, these are all biology examples, but they're all just classic. Whatever your discipline is, you're going to have those classic experiments too in introductory labs. They're helping students develop skill sets, which is great. But they can be a little boring. They can be very repetitive for you as an instructor and for students that might have done them before in high school. So think about trying to bring it up a level. Do what we call inquiry-based labs, where maybe you you combine that week 1 of the basic lab, and then week 2 is more open-ended, where students get to change a variable, actually design their own hypothesis and experimental plan, and see what happens. You can also go up another level and do what are called cures, course-based undergraduate research experiences. These can be several weeks up to the entire course long, where students are doing an authentic research project, sometimes partnered with a faculty member that has their own research lab to try to uncover something brand new. So check out some links in the show notes here. I'll put some general notes for cures there, as well as details on our specific cure we do at Colorado School of Mines called Field Session for QBE, Quantitative Biosciences and Engineering, my program, where my co-instructor John Spear and I, we have students work through this project of trying to tackle global plastic waste and recycling from a biological perspective. So I'll give some notes in there too, in the notes if you want to see more about that. Okay. So labs, again, you can apply all these structured teaching design principles to it. Have fun with it. Try to step up your game again with those more inquiry-based or course-based labs. I need to do that myself as well. So speaking to myself there. Okay, online classes. All right, online classes, whether you taught for the first time online in COVID, maybe before or now after, they have pros and cons, right? They can give more accessibility to students. They can allow students to have that class from anywhere, especially during the pandemic. That was useful as students went back home. They were able to take classes at home. So the flexibility is fantastic. Work on your own pace for an asynchronous online course, fantastic. But they also have their downsides too. There's no or little instructor presence, right? It's really hard to connect with your students online. If you're meeting an online synchronous course, so you still meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1:00. Yeah, you're going to be on Zoom. You're going to be able to talk to each other, see each other. But sometimes as an instructor, you see a bunch of black boxes staring back at you, right? So are you really connecting with your students there? I don't know. It's hard. Online asynchronous, so meaning there are no live sessions. Students work completely on their own pace. That is extra tough to build presence and community because you're not ever going to see them in a normal setting, a normal scheduled setting. Maybe you do require meetings with them based on their schedule, which I would recommend, but still you don't have that normal cadence of a classroom where you're walking in Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1:00, making eye contact, smiling at your students, using their names, waving at them, right? Having small talk before and after class. That's pretty much lost in an online environment. And that can be really troubling. Students also need to be really motivated to do well in an online class, especially those online asynchronous classes. So if there is a lack of a clear structure, lack of schedule, lack of deliverables, and it's not well organized and planned on your LMS website, students are going to really struggle. They might get lost. They might not feel motivated to do it. So it's on them for being motivated, but also on you for making it engaging and clear and exciting. And that is kind of hard to do in an online asynchronous environment, honestly. So having structure, as I'm saying, in online courses is absolutely critical to make up for some of these shortcomings with lack of presence, lack of motivation, perhaps lack of clarity with these online formats. So having this pre-class, in-class, after-class model, again, that we've been talking about with high structure is really critical in the online environment. To do with online synchronous, it's pretty easy, right? Because you still have your Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1:00 class. So you can have a pre-class reading assignment and a quiz. You can have in-class active learning, and you can have your after-class homework. So the model ports pretty well. It's not doesn't require a lot of change at all. The only change is you're sitting in your office on your computer talking to your 100 students on Zoom, and they're who knows where they are, right? Instead of being in one room together. That's really the big difference. Obviously, too, how you do active learning is different because you can't have students simply turn to their neighbor and talk because they're not there together. So you can make use of the chat box. I actually love using the chat box in Zoom for online teaching, and I still teach online these days voluntarily, not involuntarily like it was a few years ago, right? I wish we had a chat box in the real classroom, in the real world, some analog of that. I know some people do that. They do like a back channel Twitter feed or something, or they can ask questions during class. But the chat is really, really effective for online teaching. So make sure you use it. Get used to it. It can be really, really helpful. Breakout rooms are there too if you want to get students to do group work. I'm personally ambivalent at best about them and most of the time against them. I think they cause a lot of anxiety with students, especially when you do them random. So when you say, hey, everyone, we're getting to a random breakout room now, we're going to work on this activity for 5 minutes, that can cause a lot of stress. So if you are going to use breakout rooms, I suggest you have more fixed groups that you students see each other all the time. Maybe that first couple of days of class, you do some random ones to get students to meet each other, but then you kind of have more scheduled or assigned groups that they can get into to work on, because that random nature can totally be anxiety inducing. When I'm in an online webinar or workshop and the facilitator says, okay, everyone, we're going to go into breakout rooms now to say hi to each other and do this 10-minute activity, I actually just leave. I just leave the session. I don't like it. I have real bad social anxiety with meeting people on Zoom like that. It just, you go from this big room of a couple, however many people, 100 or so, and then you go to these small rooms of 5, and you're supposed to immediately connect with them and have these conversations. I just have a hard time doing that. So I just quit. It's sad, but that's just who I am. So I have my own anxieties about breakout rooms. I pass that on with the students here, and I try not to force them into these situations where they're probably going to feel anxious too. So be aware of these issues. Also, when you have breakout rooms, are students actually doing the work? It's hard to tell, right? If you have a TA, you can maybe have them bounce around to breakout rooms and check on them, but that isn't great either, because when you go to someone's breakout room, it doesn't tell you you're coming. You just show up. I've had this happen once where students were in mid rant about how bad of a class this was and how they didn't like it. And I just showed up and heard about 5 seconds of it, and they didn't know, and they felt super embarrassed. So come on, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet people, make that better. Give a warning notice you're coming. So yeah, be aware of that too. Are students actually doing the work in the breakout room? I don't know. It's hard to tell. But hopefully, if you cultivate the environment right, in the culture and your classroom right, you'll get students to buy in and want to do the work there. Okay. Proctoring too with online classes can be really, really troubling, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Are you going to have students use these lockdown browsers or proctoring tools like Proctorio or ProctorU, where they watch you on the camera, they look at your eye motion? I did this during COVID. It's one of the biggest regrets of my career, honestly. I did not enjoy it in the moment, and I don't enjoy it looking back. I feel like it's a huge invasion of privacy. It adds huge stresses on the students who are worrying about their technology working while they're also trying to solve a thermodynamics problem. I like to think of it as a necessary evil at the time, although we could have done things differently, and I wish we would have. So I feel pretty bad about it still these days, all these years later. So in the online classes I do now, I do very little, if any, proctoring like that. I do have an online final exam in my anatomy and physiology course, but for that I don't use any proctoring software. I just have students sign a brief agreement saying, hey, I'm not going to use any other materials. I'm doing this just with the organic matter between my ears. I'm not relying on any other devices or humans, or I'm not going to cheat. Is that effective 100%? Probably not. But hey, I think it feels better just to kind of level with with your students and say, hey, let's be honest with each other. Let's take this honestly and just show what we've learned in this class. So if I do have online proctored assignments these days, or online timed quizzes and things, I don't use the proctoring services. We go into Zoom together in a room. We turn our cameras on. I'm there to answer questions, and we can talk in the chat or go to a breakout room one-on-one to ask questions, but I'm not using those video surveillance type products anymore. So whatever works for you in your university, consider that, though. There are definitely some downsides with these proctoring tools, false positives, stress, anxiety, all the rest too. Okay, quickly too about asynchronous courses. So again, asynchronous, you don't really have that cadence of a schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday of class. You don't meet on Zoom with your students. You don't see each other in person. So how do you actually connect? How do you make things work? Well, when it comes to the active learning piece, one of the tips I'll give you is if you're making videos, which a lot of people do still for online courses, they make videos. And so they'll record a 20-minute video, a 10-minute video, whatever. And then they put it online for the students to watch. And they could just watch it straight through in 20 minutes of you presenting, and you're done. Or you can make it interactive. So one of the easiest things to do is, let's say you're taking materials from an in-person class and making it online asynchronous with videos, and you're going to ask students to participate in an activity, have them draw something, have them write something, have them answer a clicker question. Well, you can't really force them to do that in the online system as they currently exist. So instead, you just say, hey, pause the video here, do the activity, and when you're ready, unpause it. Okay. You don't need any tech. There are tools out there that allow you to do that, to embed questions in the middle of a video, things like that. they're kind of a pain, to be honest. All the ones I've worked with, they take a lot of work. You got to find the exact timestamp in the video to add the question, and it will force the video to stop and students to answer a question, which is nice. But again, it does take a lot of work. So instead, if you just, again, cultivate the environment that you want your students to pause the video when you're doing the video and they're doing the activity, and then unpause when they're ready to move on. Hopefully they do it, and then they'll be able to get that practice in during that minute doing that video. Let's practice right now, everybody on the pod, okay? All right, I'm going to ask you to pause the podcast and reflect on this episode and identify 2 things that you're going to try in your own online or lab courses moving forward. And then when you're ready, unpause. Okay, here we go. Pause the podcast. Okay, so there you go. You just paused the podcast. You probably spent maybe a minute, or maybe you didn't do it at all. That's fine. But you thought about what we talked about in this episode, and you want to try in your own courses now, right? So that's the way you can build that in to a video and have students get some practice without you requiring to use a lot of other tech or these other systems that may or may not work for you. Okay, so that's one way to kind of build an active learning to the online video that represents the class. I'm making quotes right now. You can't see it, but the class time of an online class. So think about doing that too. And then whatever else you can do to build community. Whatever else you can do to build community in the online course setup. Yeah, you can still do the pre-class, right? If you have these videos, you can do quote unquote class, again, pre-class readings and assessments. You can do after class, quote unquote, homework and things. So you're still having that structure, but the community is really important. So do you use discussion boards? Do you do group projects? Do you do peer feedback on assignments? Do you do video assignments? Do you make yourself videos? You send announcements? Like just continual communication, trying to interact with your students in different ways, have them interact with each other, have online office hours on demand at a certain time of day, whatever you can do to try to have that presence, to try to build that community. Because when you're an individual student taking this online asynchronous class, you might not know anyone in it. You might not get a chance to meet anybody in it. It can feel pretty lonely, and you can get unmotivated, and you can kind of, slack and slough off your work. So again, try to build that community in, building that in presence however you can around that pre, during, after class model, even in the online asynchronous environment. You can do it. Check out my book too for a lot more resources and ideas for that. All right, so that was a lot in this episode. We talked about labs, online synchronous, online asynchronous, some issues with online classes in general. But I hope you found it useful, that you can take some of these principles and apply them to your own courses. Again, whether it's lab, online sync, or online async. And again, all of this is coming from my own experience, from my research, from others' research. Check out the book for all the references and more. All right, so that's it for today's episode, everybody. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're getting ready for the fall term. It's August on the calendar now. We're getting close. So good luck prepping, everybody. Please share this with your colleagues. Let them know if they want to check it out. And then let me know if you have any feedback. I always want to hear from you, what you like about the show and how I can make it better. So thanks, everybody. Happy teaching.